You know, while I was over here waving my hands around, dancing back there when we were talking about what an awesome God is, how awesome God is, it was because for me, I have had to wrestle with this message today about forgiveness, which is our theme this whole month. And I realized that I could not step into this pulpit and speak to you about forgiveness when I still had a couple of things on my heart that I had not forgiven. And so I've been working very, very hard this whole last month trying to prepare myself spiritually, personally, emotionally for this message. And in the process, I am pleased to announce I felt a great washing over me of forgiveness. But can you imagine what the world would be like if nobody forgave? Gandhi said that an eye for an eye only ends up making the whole world blind. But forgiveness is big medicine. It is hard to swallow sometimes, that big medicine. It's certainly not a sure thing in any of our relationships and situations. But take the story of Simon Wiesenthal, who was a Polish Jew at the time and also of World War II, and also a Nazi prisoner. There was a period during the war when he was made to clean up trash at a German hospital for wounded Nazi soldiers. Late one evening, he walked into the room of a soldier who asked him, "Are you a Jew?" And Wiesenthal said, "Yes." And the soldier grabbed his hand with the little bit of life he had left in him. And the soldier explained, "I need to make a dying confession to a Jew." He explained how he had rounded up 200 Russian Jews in a small village, forced them into a building which he set on fire, and then he stood outside and shot the ones who tried to escape. "Now I need the forgiveness of a Jew," he said, "on behalf of all Jews whom I know I've wronged, so that I can die in peace." Wiesenthal had lost 89 members of his own family in the Holocaust, and he could hardly believe what he was hearing. What should he do? Should he forgive the man? Should he tell him he hopes that he rots for eternity for what he's done? Does Wiesenthal even have the right to forgive this man? Wiesenthal stood there for a moment, staring at the dying man in silence, and then he just turned and walked out of the room. But he couldn't leave behind his feelings of being deeply, deeply disturbed by that interaction and that moment. After the war, Wiesenthal wrote about his experience, and he asked others what they would have done if they were in his shoes. The majority said that they would not have forgiven the man. Some said Wiesenthal had absolutely no right to forgive the soldier on behalf of others who had not given him the authorization to do so. The philosopher Herbert Marcuse wrote that one cannot and should not go around happily killing and torturing, and then when the moment has come, simply ask and receive forgiveness. Another respondent, author Cynthia Ozick, quoted ancient rabbis who said, "Whoever is merciful to the cruel will end by being indifferent to the innocent." She went on to say, "Forgiveness can brutalize." It's not always a good thing. Forgiveness, she said, can brutalize. The face of forgiveness appears mild, but how stony it is to the slaughtered. "Let the SS man die unshriven," she said. "Let him go to hell." The Oklahoma City bombers who senselessly took the lives of so many beautiful children and others in this state on what was otherwise a very average day, and turned it into a living hell for so many people. And those who bombed the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001, and the marathon bombers in Boston. Should forgiveness ever be a consideration for such acts of death and destruction? Or should these people rot in prison for the rest of their lives and have to sit in a hell of their own making? Is forgiveness even possible in these situations? Is it something that should even be suggested for the victims to participate in? The very worth and possibility of forgiveness must be questioned. We just talk about, I forgive, we got to forgive and forget, forgive. The very possibility of forgiveness needs to be questioned. Of course, these are egregious acts of human evil. Some of us might argue that forgiveness for things of this magnitude is unacceptable, even if we're open to the possibility of forgiveness for lesser wrongs. What about betrayal and theft? What about rape and incest? What about adultery and abandonment, irresponsibility, abuse, lying, stealing? Where do we draw the line? Is there a line? Is forgiveness even possible? I mean, really. How about our member, Michelle Murphy, who spent 20 years of her life in prison for a crime she did not commit? Michelle Murphy was 17 years old when she went to prison, and her whole life was turned upside down. She not only experienced the gruesome murder of her baby child, but Michelle was accused and ultimately wrongfully convicted of the crime. Can you imagine such a thing? Everything she knew and loved was taken from her in an instant. In the midst of that unimaginable grief of losing her child so tragically and so suddenly, Michelle also lost her freedom, her family, and her reputation. For 2 decades, the courts and the public presumed her guilty. She spent more of her life at this point in prison than she has free. For the wrong reason. And I don't think it couldn't happen to any one of us. I hope you're going to be here at the service at 3 o'clock. Not just because it's going to be powerful, but because it's important. For 2 decades, only a few of her closest friends, one was a high school teacher of hers, believed in her innocence and kept the case alive. Fortunately and quite miraculously, with the hard work of some generous lawyers and the backing of the Innocence Project, Michelle Murphy was cleared of this heinous crime and deemed innocent by the courts. 20 years after, on the exact day of her child's death, on September 12th, 2014, about 6 weeks ago, Michelle walked out of the courtroom free of the stigma of a wrongful conviction. She just celebrated her, we could say her 18th birthday in freedom, although she's 38 years old. Now I can say as a parent who lost a young child to death suddenly, absolutely unexpectedly, that if I did not have the incredible love and prayers and goodwill of my family, of my friends, of this congregation, of the wider community, I don't even think I could have survived, let alone if I were accused that it was my fault and then I lost everything, ripped away from me in an instant, and people turning on me, including she lost her other child. I have another child. I can't even imagine losing my child in the midst of all of that. And according to what I've read in the papers, the district attorney has now admitted that he made a false statement to the jury. Now, he claims that he didn't know, and that's under dispute. But his false statement to the jury, something he did not know, did not have evidence for, and told them was true, landed her in prison for more than half of her life, and it could have landed her for the rest of her life if it weren't for these lawyers. Why, we might wonder, would a person like Michelle, who has lost so much for no reason, ever forgive a person for doing such a thing? How could the prosecuting attorney live with himself for having done such a devastating and irreversible thing? Forgiveness under such circumstances can feel like an assault on our basic instinct for fair play and justice. Because as human beings, we want justice. We want wrongs to be righted. And when it happens, we feel good because we want it. We know it's important. The painting outside in the foyer that describes our church, has objects that describe our church, has a scale in it. And the scale represents justice because justice is a core value of this community. And yet forgiveness often seems to fly in the very face of our longing for justice. But let's step back a minute today and let's look at what we mean by forgiveness. Is it letting someone off the hook for what they've done? Is it accepting their behavior? Is it forgetting, as in the expression forgive and forget? Is it enabling bad behavior? Because if it's about letting someone off the hook, if it's about accepting or condoning their bad behavior, it's about forgetting what they've done or about enabling them to keep doing what they've been doing, then I think the question is easily answered. Forget it. Forget forgiveness. I wouldn't be up here talking about it. I wouldn't be in support. How could we ever forget an injury or an offense that's been perpetrated against us? I mean, forget it? People have tried with gallons of booze and pounds of pills, but escape is not forgiveness. And denial of the pains of the past does not open us up to the future, and forgiveness is about the future. Forgiveness is a commitment to the future. Remember the story of Jesus and the adulterous woman in the temple? Some of you remember, some of you don't even know what I'm talking about probably. There's an adulterous woman in the temple. She's been accused of adultery. The people gather. All right, you'll get a hang of it in just a minute. So Jesus is lured into this conflict by the Pharisees who are trying to get him to break the law in public. So he can be ridiculed and he can be condemned because he's starting to get a following and they believe he's a heretic. And so they're trying to draw him out so that he makes a statement that's seen as heretical, breaking the religious law of the times in the temple. The Pharisees were all about following the letter of the law. These were religious leaders of the time who were all about the letter of the law. And in the story, the woman's guilt is apparently not in question. She did what they say she did. She committed adultery. Now, this is a serious offense back then, and she was prescribed the punishment of being stoned to death because that is written clearly in what it says in what they say is God's law in the Mosaic Code. Stoned to death for adultery. So the people have stones in their hands and they're standing in the temple and the Pharisees are pointing her out and they're waiting to see what Jesus is about to do. This is high drama. This is before reality TV and all the rest of it. It's like, wow. Maybe we're going to go home and talk. Did you see what happened in the temple today? It makes our church look boring. You know, we don't do much really exciting around here. But Jesus is a faithful Jew and he's a teacher and he stands before the people and he says, let the person who is without sin among us be the one to throw the first stone. And then one by one, each person lays down their stone and walks away. Once they've left, Jesus looks at the woman and he says, has no one condemned you? Neither do I. Go and sin no more. It's about the future. Forgiveness is about the future. Now, Jesus is not saying that her behavior is acceptable. He's not suggesting that she or others forget what she's done. But he is saying that he does not condone her. He says, go and sin no more. We learn in this story that forgiveness is future-oriented. It's about a belief that people can overcome their past and they can seek a better future and that we're all in the process of becoming and evolving. We have to give ourselves and other people the ability and the opportunity It's a radical claim that no matter what we've done, life holds within it the possibility of transformation. As long as we have breath, we have the opportunity to open up to a new day and a new moment in our lives. It comes from the conviction that no life is so shattered, sheltered, or shamed that it cannot be a vehicle for God's grace, by which I mean transforming love, a vehicle for transforming love. The future is a blank canvas. It's an open book, and change is possible, and this is the day that we've been given. Not yesterday, that's gone. This is the very day that we've been given. Now, in this Bible story, we also learn where our forgiveness comes from. It comes from our recognition, our ability to forgive. It comes from our recognition of our own need for forgiveness. It comes from our willingness to look at our own mistakes and the ways that we've hurt and offended and caused injury to others. Let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone, and everyone drops their stones and walks away. Because we've all been there. And when we look into our own heart and we recognize our own potential for destruction and evil and harm of others in the ways that we have harmed ourselves and others in our lives, we recognize through our own failings and the own ways we've been forgiven by others, our capacity to forgive. Now let's face it, life is messy and it's brutal and it's at times filled with deprivation and deceit and greed and selfishness and lots of bad theology and bad religion and perverted history and cycles of dysfunction and temptation and manipulation. If the world and each of us were perfect, there'd be no need for forgiveness. I'd be out of a job. So it begins with the self-knowledge that we are weak sometimes, and fallible, and that we are capable of evil. Not one of us knows what we would do if we were Germans during World War II. Not one of us knows what we would do at any point in history, what we would do. And we need to approach our lives with that kind of humility and approach every moment and every person in our lives. Our ability to forgive is directly related to our own experience of needing to be forgiven. Those of us who've been forgiven in the past, we know something about its power. And the adulterous woman, whose life was spared in that moment in the story, is now more likely to be forgiving to others. Don't you think? Pride often gets in the way of our admitting that we need forgiveness. Had the first person not dropped his stone, you know everybody else would have started hurling their stones as well. And that's why we have to model that kind of humility with one another and be honest with ourselves, because other people are looking at us to see what we're going to do. And when we get vulnerable, we get open, and we get honest, the people around us also learn to do it as well. Or at least we hope they do, and we give them the opportunity to. Forgiveness begets forgiveness, and it frees us of the ego and the illusion that we are somehow superior to others. I know we like to feel superior to others. It allows us to remind ourselves that that person is our equal in the sense that they are just as deserving of love as we are. I said this is big medicine. But as Dorothy tells us, even they are included in God's love. And that we are as deserving of love as anyone else, no matter what we've done. Nothing can take that away. What I'm describing here is the core of universalism. What I'm describing here is the gospel of Jesus Christ. He didn't just say love your neighbors. He said love your enemies. Well, that takes forgiveness. When asked how many times should we forgive someone, who has harmed us, Jesus says 70 times 7. But what about the people who are showing no signs of changing? We have to admit, that's pretty hard to forgive someone who's showing absolutely no signs of changing themselves. Do we need to forgive them too? You know we do. But it starts to feel like enabling bad behavior if we're not careful. Remember, forgiving, though, is not about letting someone off the hook. It's not about not holding somebody accountable. It's about accepting it's not about accepting or agreeing with what they've done, but it is about accepting that they are as worthy of love as we are. And it's important to keep in mind that it's often after someone is forgiven that they begin to change. Receiving forgiveness gives a person permission to change. It invites them to try a new way of being. Author Patrick Miller, in his book, The Little Book of Forgiveness, tells the story of forgiving his parents for all the wrongs that he felt that they had done to him. That can be big medicine too, depending on who your parents are. But afterward, he witnessed his parents become much more open with him about their personal histories, their personal experiences, the things that shaped and formed them. It seems that his signs of acceptance of them gave them permission to be more open and honest and vulnerable about who they are. The power of forgiveness and acceptance of a person in light of their failings can create an opening for new realities and potentials for both people involved. Now, in the case of infidelity, the question often becomes, are we going to make this event a blanket that snuffs out the light and the life and the love of our relationship? Or will we make it an opening through which we shine a light at what's really going on between us, at what's really going on within us, so that we can choose to start anew and build an even stronger connection, possibly. Now, that said, not everyone will change because they've been forgiven, right? And that's why we should not forgive with the intention of changing someone else, but rather we need to forgive with the intention of changing ourselves. Miller says that in offering forgiveness, don't begin with the idea that you are doing a favor to someone who hurt you, but with the idea that you are being merciful to yourself. If you are trying to decide whether someone deserves your forgiveness, then you're asking the wrong question. Because forgiveness is about our being able to let go of our hate and our resentment. It's really about us. It's not about the other person. That's why refusing to forgive is often equated with taking poison ourselves in order to try to hurt someone else. But unlike poisonous snakes, we are not immune to our own venom. And therefore we are poisoned by the hatreds and the resentments that we harbor. Forgiveness is a way of not letting past events control us into the future. As they say in AA, why are you giving that person rent in your head? Why are you giving that person free place to stay in your life and your mind over and over and over again? Let them go. It's about healing the hate and the resentment that we feel. And we can't think our way into it. It's not logically, yes, I understand, I need to stop giving rent to that person in my head. It's not that easy, or that event. It's not that easy. We can't think our way into it. It's a feeling. When I said I felt some forgiveness in my own life recently during the last few weeks, and it was incredible. It was like a release of attention. It was like this warmth that just washed over my body, and I felt this comfort, and I felt this relaxed state. It's an incredible feeling, but it's a feeling. It's not a thought. And we can't get there just in our heads. What's done cannot be undone. Nothing can change it. Nothing can make it not have happened. But with forgiveness, we can transcend the past. And we can build our future. One of my favorite definitions of that, did I mention this, is letting go of the hope of a better yesterday. Letting go of the hope of a better yesterday. Yesterday's gone. But today is right here, and it's filled with possibilities and choices. And we have to decide, are we going to do it for ourselves? Because it's not about the other person. So, one of the ways that we can start to forgive, I mean, talking about practical, so a little practical advice about it, is we can't forget. We can never forget fully anything, but we can, sometimes we need a little bit of forgetting in order to forgive. And that's, what I mean by that is sometimes we need to forget just for a little while what happened. Because when we're harboring some resentment, some hatred, some difficult and strong emotional feelings, sometimes we need to be able to forget them for a short period of time so that we can be in the moment and we can appreciate the moment and we can be here right now. Because right now is beautiful. Right now is full of possibilities. But if we're living in the past, which is just a dream of yesterday, or we're living in the future, which is just a fantasy of something that we don't know whether it's going to happen, now is the only moment that's real. And if we can live now and open ourselves to the present and stop letting whatever it is dominate us in our minds, then we can start opening to that moment, which opens us up to the future. And forgiveness is about the future. Choose, therefore, today over yesterday. Choose the future over the past. Because at some point, we all need to put down our stones and walk away. Remember, forgiveness is one of the highest forms of love. And learning to love is what life is all about. Go forth and forgive as you have been forgiven, and sin no more. I love you. Amen. Because this is the day that we've been given, the day that you've been given, while you still have breath, seek that place of forgiveness within you. Maybe it's something that you have done. Maybe it's something somebody has been done to you. But find that place of forgiveness. I was thinking that piece about Simon Wiesenthal and what would I do? What would I have done? You know, if he would have forgiven the man, he would have been having to live with that and maybe thought that was a mistake the whole time too. The thing is, I realized it wasn't for him to forgive. He needed to turn to that German soldier and say, you need to ask God for forgiveness. And I do believe that God is big enough to forgive any sin. And God will love us always. And there is a love that is so powerful that it will embrace us no matter what we've done. Because God is an awesome God. And when we feel that lift from our heart and that warmth of grace washing over us, we will never forget it. And we will do everything in our power to go out into the world and be vessels of that kind of love and that kind of grace. May you go forth from this place and share that love, the love that's beyond belief. Amen?